So, wow. I have just finished The Dead of the Night by John Marsden. This is the second in the Tomorrow the War Began series. And if the first one was electrifying and surprisingly excellent, this one was an emotional roller coaster. John certainly put his characters through an intense and thrilling and scary ride, and we, the authors, went along with it. So often in this kind of series, you look at the second one, you'll think, oh, I didn't mind it in some ways, but it was maybe not as good as the first. Here, I would say that The Dead of the Night is as good as Tomorrow When the War Began, but as a novel on the whole, I feel there's a bit of a difference to it. So with Tomorrow, it was very much setting the scene in an Australian scenario. By The Dead of the Night, we've already got the scene set, and Tomorrow has got the dynamic of the 7 kids coming out of their camping to find that everyone's gone and everyone's dead. What has happened? So the thrill is created that way, and finding out that they've been invaded and that they are in danger of being captured. That was electrifying. With The Dead of the Night, they have completed all the events in the first book, which ended in a thrilling explosion of a bridge which was necessary to the supply chain of the invaders, and now they're hiding out in the gorge. So you start with a parcel of bored teenagers sitting in a gorge, not really knowing what's happening, and eventually they come out. They decide that they've got to do something. Anyway, leaving aside what they actually do, as a novel as a whole, Tomorrow When the War Began feels to me very much like a perfect geometry shape, like a circle which is completely described, maybe an isosceles triangle, where you can know everything and everything seems completely mathematically integral to the shape itself. Nothing seemed out of place, nothing seemed unnecessary. The Dead of the Night is, in terms of the plot, it's a bit more inconsistent. So we start with them in the valley. They decide they've got to explore. Most of them follow the stream up the ravine they're living in with the idea of getting through the mountains into the next territory, which is, I think, the city and environment, the town and the environs of Risdon, to see what's happening over there. One boy chooses to remain behind. This one boy is the one that wasn't on the original camping trip. They found him when they were going back to the town after the invasion. So that's Chris. The ride that we go on with the kids going through the ravine, that is a wahoo of a ride. And I seem to remember that when I first read this one, I wasn't as thrilled with it as I was with the first one. They come through the ravine, they come up to the other side, they discover a whole group of Australians have created what do they call them, Hogan Heroes? Harold's Heroes, something or other, a group that claimed to be a guerrilla group. Only the kids aren't. Well, Ellie, who's our main narrator, isn't terribly impressed by them because they don't seem to be doing much except some dodgy organisational stuff. What the others feel we don't really get, because Ellie tells this story very much from her own perspective. Now, what happens to the kids when they're in that camp is uneasy reading. I didn't like it when I first read it. I still don't like it. You're not meant to like it, I'm pretty sure. But it's got that sort of itchy, I'm not quite comfortable with this feeling throughout. The way it ends is a phenomenal burst of fireworks. Then they're back to their valley. Chris is missing. Obviously something is happening. Eventually they decide they've sat around too long and they have to do something more in retaliation than they've been doing so far. And they come up with a plan to blow up the headquarters of the higher-ups in the invading army, who have taken over some of the nicer houses in town and are using them as quarters and as headquarters. That comes off brilliantly. And you also get a conclusion to the story of Chris and what happened with him. And yeah, roller coaster of a ride. A good things happens, but then you crash, and then there's this explosion. I could not put this down. I ended up staying up way too late last night finishing it because there's no way that I could sleep with all the adrenaline coursing through my body from what was happening in this book. And that's what's happened in the first 2 books of the series so far. The adrenal glands work the hell out of themselves because there's so much happening. It's so intense. I am so invested in the character of Ellie and the other characters, and I can't really stop. Now, in terms of character development, I think a lot of our character development happened in the first book where we met all the kids. We're now a few kids short. There's only 2 boys and 3 girls left in the canyon at the moment. The first book was narrated by Ellie, who had been asked to do so by the others. So she was writing for the whole group. But at the end of the book, she said, now I'm going to give it to the others to read. I hope they're okay with it. I've been very, very honest. At the start of this book, we find out that they weren't entirely okay with it, and they've been a bit weird about it. So she says, I'm writing this, but I'm certainly not going to show anyone else what I've written. I think that might be the reason why we get mostly Ellie's point of view. The others haven't isolated her in any way, but they're maybe not as chatty with her as they were initially. In this one, we also get a bit more of a romance theme, because in the first one, there were hints that romance might happen one day in the future, but they weren't really happening here. In this book, you can see that Ellie and Lee have actually got together. It's not a big part of the theme. It's not the selection type romance where all you ever hear about is what she thinks about, he thinks about her, him looking at her when she's looking at him, until you want to shoot both of them in the head and go off and do something better. It's a part of the integral plot, and they're both conflicted about their life in general. Ellie's conflicted about their relationship. All of them have got issues to solve in their own selves about what they're doing, which is basically killing enemy soldiers. And they're teenagers. The writing is still as gorgeous, and I'm going to read a bit of it, but you can go away now if you don't want to hear this. So, they've just, in self-defense, attacked a soldier who was following Fee. Ellie hit him with a rock, Homer hit him with a branch, and he's lying there, and they don't really know what to do. They kind of know they have to kill him for their own defense, but killing in cold blood is something they haven't really faced before, only in self-defense. And they're agonizing over it a bit. One of the things I find strangest and hardest is that we were having such conversations. We should have been talking about discos and email and exams and bands. How could this have been happening to us? How could we have been huddled in the dark bush, cold and hungry and terrified, talking about who we should kill? We had no preparation for this, no background, no knowledge. We didn't know if we were doing the right thing ever. We didn't know anything. We were just ordinary teenagers, so ordinary we were boring. Overnight, they'd pulled the roof off our lives, and after they'd pulled off the roof, they'd come in and torn down the curtains, ripped up the furniture, burnt the house, and thrown us into the night, where we'd been forced to run and hide and live like wild animals. We had no foundations, and we had no secure walls around our lives anymore. We were living in a strange, long nightmare where we had to make our own rules, invent new values, stumble around blindly, hoping we weren't making too many mistakes. We clung to what we knew and what we thought was right, but all the time those things too were being stripped from us. So I think that is quite beautiful writing, and I think it is a perfect representation of someone in those sort of circumstances, and it echoes quite truthfully for any of us who, like myself, have read stories written by actual children or young people who were surviving war, whether it was World War I, World War II, some of the smaller and more recent wars. That sense of bewilderment of having lost your life, and what are you going to make with what's left of it, because you don't recognize the you that's making the decisions. So throughout this book, the beautiful writing is part of what makes it such a adrenaline-filled, I can't put you down type of book, but also the characters, because the characters still feel very Australian and very real. They don't feel artificial to me. They're not as strongly rounded as the first book, perhaps, but they don't feel stereotypical, and they make some fascinating decisions which you may not have predicted, but which make sense with their characters and their circumstance. So anyway, The Dead of the Night, a very able second book in this Tomorrow series, and I'm reviewing it now, first thing in the morning, because I cannot wait all day before I go on to number 3. I just have to keep going.